Rain-slicked streets glistened beneath the neon lights as Charles pulled into the hotel, tired from travel, but carrying himself with quiet dignity. All he wanted was a room for the night, just a place to rest before his next flight. But what awaited him inside wasn't exhaustion's relief. It was rejection, cold and deliberate. Not because the hotel was full, but because of something far uglier. In that moment, Charles wasn't seen as the man he truly was, wealthy, powerful, accomplished, but reduced to the color of his skin. What he did next would turn humiliation into history. He thought it would end at the front desk, but that night was only the beginning. Charles wasn't a man who blended into the background. At 6'2", with a sharp mind and a sharper wardrobe, he carried himself with the ease of someone who had fought his way to the top and stayed there. Years of relentless work had turned him into more than successful. He was a billionaire, though he rarely flaunted it. To most, he was just another traveler that night, driving through Naples, Florida, his SUV cutting through the rain as he searched for a place to rest. To Charles, hotels were never just buildings. They were symbols of hospitality, of welcome. He'd stayed in hundreds across the globe, from the understated to the extravagant. And usually stepping into a lobby meant comfort, not conflict. But as he pulled up to the Grand Horizon, its golden lights reflecting off wet pavement, something in the pit of his stomach whispered that this night would be different. Because sometimes, the doors that should open with warmth close with a chill colder than the rain outside. He thought the hardest part of his evening was behind him, but the real storm was waiting inside. The polished glass doors of the Grand Horizon whispered open as Charles stepped inside, shaking off the rain. The lobby glowed with chandeliers and polished marble, every corner crafted to whisper wealth and exclusivity. Normally, he would have admired the craftsmanship, the clean symmetry, the soft scent of lilies drifting through the air. But tonight his eyes were fixed on one thing, the front desk, a place where comfort was supposed to begin. He approached with his usual calm confidence, sliding his card from his wallet, ready for a routine check-in. The clerk, Evan, his name tag read, barely glanced up. His fingers tapped sluggishly on the keyboard before he delivered his verdict in a flat, dismissive tone. "We're fully booked." Charles's brows lifted slightly. The lobby was nearly empty. The elevators chimed, the lounge hummed quietly, and yet Evan's words hung in the air with a finality that didn't fit. Charles leaned in, still polite, still patient. "Not a single room?" His voice was steady, offering the clerk a chance to clarify, to correct himself. But Evan's eyes told a different story. He smirked, lips curling in a way that said this wasn't about policy or availability. It was personal, deliberate. And before Charles could press further, the revolving doors spun again. A couple entered, their suitcases rattling across the tiles. Evan's demeanor shifted instantly. His shoulders straightened, his smile brightened, his voice softened into something warm and welcoming. "No reservation?" "No problem." Within minutes, the couple had a room key in hand and a cheerful farewell. Charles stood silent, the weight of the lie pressing against his chest. Fully booked, Evan had said, but only when it was Charles asking. The message was unspoken yet undeniable. He wasn't denied because of timing or policy or availability. He was denied because of who he was, or rather because of what he looked like. He walked out into the storm, the rain hitting harder now, but the sting in his chest sharper still. For a moment, he considered confronting Evan, calling out the hypocrisy in front of everyone. But years of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals had taught him that power wasn't always in the first strike. Sometimes, it was in patience. So Charles lingered in the shadows just outside, leaning against the cold marble pillar, watching. Minutes later, another man walked in. This one young, dressed casually, clearly a weary traveler. He asked for a room. Charles couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Evan's wide grin, the quick tap of keys, the swift slide of a keycard across the counter, everything told the story. Rooms existed, just not for him. Charles's jaw tightened. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscommunication. It was a choice. And it was bigger than a single room on a single night. How many others had faced this same quiet rejection? How many had walked away humiliated, carrying wounds no one else could see? As Charles slipped back into his SUV, the rain-slicked streets ahead blurred into streaks of light through the windshield. His thoughts were sharp, not clouded by anger, but focused with precision. He had spent decades turning rejection into opportunity, insult into fuel. And this time would be no different. He found a diner glowing red against the wet night, its neon sign humming as if to remind him that warmth still existed somewhere. Inside, he ordered coffee, opened his laptop, and began typing. The hotel that had closed its doors on him wasn't just a symbol of prejudice, it was an opportunity. He had heard whispers in meetings about the Grand Horizon struggling financially, rumors of its chain looking for a buyer. At the time, he hadn't cared. But now, the pieces fit together like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Charles made the call. His attorney, Lisa, picked up groggy but attentive. "I need the paperwork on the Grand Horizon," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "By sunrise." There was a pause. "Sunrise?" she repeated, disbelief laced in her voice. "Sunrise," he confirmed. When he ended the call, he looked out at the rain streaking the window, the storm outside mirroring the quiet storm inside him. This wasn't just about owning a building. It was about showing that dignity has a price, and sometimes those who try to strip it from others end up paying the highest cost. The night stretched on as contracts were signed electronically, deals closed, and arrangements finalized. By the time dawn broke, painting the Florida sky in streaks of pink and gold, the Grand Horizon Hotel had a new owner. And the man they thought unworthy of a room was now the one holding the keys to every single one. He thought he had endured the worst of their arrogance that night, but what came next would shake the very walls of the hotel. The morning sun glinted off the Grand Horizon's towering glass as Charles returned, no longer a guest seeking shelter, but the owner holding the deed. His charcoal gray suit cut a sharp line against the light, his presence commanding every step as he walked through the same doors that had once shut him out. The lobby staff bustled, unaware that their world was about to shift. Evan stood behind the desk, tapping idly at the keyboard, his expression the same mix of arrogance and indifference Charles remembered. When their eyes met, recognition flickered, then confusion, then unease. The man he had dismissed as unworthy just hours before was back, but something in his stride made it clear. He wasn't here for a room, he was here for justice. Charles didn't need raised voices or dramatic gestures. His silence was louder than any words. The regional manager appeared, summoned hastily when whispers began spreading among the staff. With calm authority, Charles pulled out the signed paperwork, placing it on the polished counter. The logo of the Grand Horizon shimmered faintly at the top of the page. Beneath it, his name etched in ink. The truth settled over the room like a sudden storm. Gasps rippled through the staff. The lobby, once a place where his presence had been denied, was now his. The very building they had guarded against him now belonged to him entirely. Evan's face drained of color, his smirk collapsing into silence. It wasn't just a transaction. It was the moment the mask of prejudice was torn away for all to see. Every excuse, every lie, every thin smile meant to hide bias had been exposed. In that instant, Charles wasn't just reclaiming his dignity, He was making a statement for every person who had ever been quietly turned away, told there was no room, when in truth, there had never been a place for them in someone else's eyes. For Charles, this was never about revenge. It was about showing that justice can arrive in unexpected forms, sometimes not in protest or in anger, but in ownership, in rewriting the story so completely that those who once belittled you are forced to confront their own reflection. The staff waited, breath held, as if the walls themselves were listening. Evan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His silence was the most honest thing he had ever given Charles. In that moment, Charles understood the true weight of what he had done. This wasn't just his victory, it was a symbol. A reminder that silence in the face of discrimination is complicity, and action, even quiet, deliberate action, can shake the very foundations of injustice. The hotel that had refused him a room now carried his name on every contract, every key card, every ledger. And as he looked around the grand lobby, filled with the same golden light as the night before, he knew this moment wasn't just about him. It was about rewriting the rules for those who came after. The question wasn't whether he had won. The question was what he would do with the power he now held. Because ownership was just the beginning, and the real test of justice was about to begin. Charles didn't linger in the lobby after the papers were signed. He didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice, didn't rub victory in the faces of those who had wronged him. He simply stood tall, his presence alone enough to shift the air in the room. The very space that had denied him dignity only hours before now answered to him. But for Charles, the win wasn't about personal pride. It was about principle. Owning the grand horizon meant more than controlling a building. It meant dismantling, brick by brick, the quiet walls of exclusion that had stood unchallenged for too long. From that moment forward, his first order of business wasn't luxury renovations or profit margins. It was change. Policies were rewritten. Diversity and inclusion were no longer buzzwords but enforced practices. And every employee, from the highest manager to the newest recruit, would understand that hospitality was not a privilege offered to some, but a right extended to all. For Charles, the sting of that night never fully left him. The rain-soaked rejection, the cold smirk at the front desk, it was a scar etched deep. But scars can either harden us or remind us of the battles we've fought and won. For him, it was both. It reminded him why his fight wasn't just for himself, but for the countless others who didn't have the wealth, power, or platform to demand justice. Because that's the truth of stories like these. Charles's ending is rare. Too often, those turned away have no chance to return as owners. Too often, the prejudice they face is quiet enough to be denied, yet loud enough to wound. And while one man may have rewritten his fate, millions still carry the weight of discrimination in silence. The lesson of the grand horizon isn't that money conquers racism. It's that racism leaves scars no fortune can erase. But when faced with injustice, there is always a choice: to walk away quietly or to act in a way that echoes beyond ourselves. Charles chose the latter, and now the question falls to us. How many more stories like his will we allow to unfold before we confront the truth? How many more doors will silently close before we demand they stay open? The grand horizon became a symbol that day, not of exclusion, but of possibility. But one man's victory will never be enough to undo centuries of injustice. That requires all of us. So as you think about this story, ask yourself, the next time you witness prejudice, will you walk away in silence, or will you take a stand that might just change everything?